This is Michael Cowan, and welcome to Trial Lawyer Nation.
He helps us pan for the gold inside ourselves.
You need to have grit. I mean, a lot of this is grit.
I feel like I've been made a better lawyer.
They're talking about something that's real to them.
You have to be really careful not to be Goliath.
They saved a bunch of lives and changed society forever.
But let's just begin the conversation.
Welcome to Trial Lawyer Nation, your source for guidance to win bigger verdicts, get more cases, and manage your practice. And now, here's your host, noteworthy author, sought-after speaker, and renowned trial lawyer, Mikal Cowan.
This week on Trial Lawyer Nation, our guest is Mikal Watts, one of the best trial lawyers in this country. When I was growing up as a plaintiff's lawyer, I started doing plaintiff's law back in '97. Mikal Watts is who I wanted to be. I remember when he got his first $80 million verdict, fuel-fed fire case down in Starr County, Texas, and from there, he did Fort Firestone, was knocking out 8-figure and 9-figure verdicts right and left, became the man in Texas and now nationally. He's got so many huge verdicts, and he was kind enough to come in here and tell me things that I really would have liked to know when I was building up my own practice. He's going to talk about how he's gotten those verdicts, and equally important, I think he's going to talk about how he's built his practice up and kind of some of the sacrifices he's had to make and which ones he thinks are worth it and which ones he doesn't think were worth it. I think those of us that are building up our own practices are going to get a lot out of this. I know I did. So here's our interview with Mikal Watts. I really appreciate you coming on today, Mikal.
Glad to be here.
And let's just kind of start from the beginning. Well, I guess the first thing is, how did you get here? I mean, you started off, you left David Perry's office, you didn't have a bunch of money in the bank. How did you do it?
Yeah, I left when I was 29 years, 8 months old. I was cleaning my office, and I found a note that I wrote myself the day I showed up at David Perry's office when I was 21. And it had a series of goals about how much money I wanted to be making and how many verdicts I wanted to have. And one of the goals was to have my own law firm by the time I was 30. And I just stared at it for over an hour, and I realized that if I didn't leave what was a very good situation, there was no reason to leave. He was fair. He paid me well, good opportunities. But if I didn't leave, that when I turned 40, I was still going to be there and still wondering. So I went into his office. And actually, I drove up to his ranch. I went into his office. He wasn't there. And he was up at his ranch. And that was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do at the time is tell him I was leaving. And I just showed him the note. I said, this is the only reason I'm leaving. So I left with $10,000 in the bank, and that was it. And 3 kids at home. My wife thought I was crazy.
Yeah.
So, we took the plunge, and it was the most exhilarating year of my life. You feel like you're swimming in quicksand, but it's the most exciting swim you've ever done, and you work harder, and there's nothing better than working for a boss you really like. So we made the plunge, and literally picked an office location that was right across the street from the courthouse, because back then everybody had law libraries before everything was digital. And I didn't want to pay for one because didn't have the money for one, so literally did the legal research by walking across the parking lot to the Nueces County Courthouse and using the free books. So that's where I chose my office and why, and then literally had my outdoor picnic furniture in the office. And it was Spartan, to say the least, until about 4 months in, we got into a beauty contest on a big a double death case that involved a post-collision fuel-fed fire in a Dodge truck, and the other big corpus firms were all there. And so literally my mom was officing in the same building at the time before she became a judge, and over the weekend we moved all of her furniture up into my office and all of my furniture down into her office, and these guys from California came in and we put our best foot forward to try to get this big case and somehow talked them into it. And that was my first big case
Thanks,
in
Mom.
my own firm. And it turned out to be pivotal because we got the case. We tried it to an $80 million verdict, and I've been busy ever since.
So I guess you'd say the keys were taking the plunge, getting the big case, and then having the intestinal fortitude to try it.
Yeah, and I think one of the other keys is if you decide you're going to start your own firm, you've got to go all in. You delay things like fancy cars, boats, second houses, vacations. You got to throw your heart, your mind, your soul, and all your money into building a business from scratch. One of the tough things about the way our tax laws are structured is that when you and I put $50,000-$100,000 into a case, and once you pass January 1st, that's taxable income. The fact that it's gone in some expert's pocket doesn't matter. You can't write it off. And so, effectively, you have this incredible tax rate where you're being taxed on income that you're not seeing because you're investing it in cases. And I remember for the course of several years, my wife, signing our tax returns and looking at these incredibly powerful numbers that she knew wasn't coming home. She says, "Where's it all going?" And I said, "It's going right back into the cases." And you got $5 million in cases. That's something that you got to be taxed on. So.
And that is how long did you drive that same pickup truck after?
Yeah, I drove a 1987 Dodge Ram 50 that I literally bought in college because it was $137 a month, and kept it until 2002. So I had my own firm for 5 years by then, and one of my law partners finally went out and bought me a truck, and he says, "We're not going to get any referrals with you driving that piece of crap around." so it was abandoned.
But it's really deferring that gratification. I mean, I'm sure you got a decent settlement out of that $80 million verdict while it was up on appeal. I probably can't say what it was, but
yeah.
I mean, a lot of people would have just gone out and right then bought a fancy car, bought a fancy house.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when I started doing that, but between 1997 and 2001, I lived like a Spartan and worked like a dog, and worked hard to build a law firm, and tried case after case after case after case because I felt like that was the fastest way to be able to build the brand from the standpoint of marketing. Was just jury verdicts. It's the best advertising tonic there is, and so that's all I did was try cases.
And that is I agree that jury verdicts are the best way to get yourself out there if you can win, which is not so easy nowadays. First of all, what are some of the verdicts that I know you got really hot for a while? You're just 8-9-figure verdicts, one after another.
Right.
What are some of the ones that you're most proud of?
Well, the first one that I tried with my new firm was a double death fire case where we got an $80 million verdict against Chrysler. That one will always be, the most special because it was the first. There were some big refinery verdicts, some big automotive verdicts, some big pharmaceutical verdicts. But in Texas, of course, it's a challenge, right? In most states, you take a verdict and you've got an even-up shot of holding on to it. In Texas, it's merely a bargaining chip from which to negotiate before Nathan Heck decides to take it away on appeal when it gets to the Texas Supreme Court. So you've got to be careful in the state of Texas. But, we've always tried to try a significant number of cases because I'll never forget in 1995 when I was still working at my old firm, I went and played golf with an insurance adjuster. My friend Jeff Wigington and David Rumley, who've got their own firm now, we were all golfing buddies back then, and they did some insurance work for, I don't remember which carrier, but we thought 1995 was big tort reform. We didn't have an idea what was coming in 2003, but I remember the guy told me every insurance company has a sheet of paper and they draw a line down the middle of it and they put all the lawyers' names on one side of that line or not. And I said, well, what's the line? It's like, the line is who will try the cases, and you don't want to be on the wrong side of that line. And I remember that stuck with me. So I've always tried to try enough cases to let everybody know we're still doing it. But there's a flip side. When you're married and you're raising 3 kids and you're gone constantly, that's not good for a marriage. And I used to pick a lot of fights that I don't pick anymore. I'm better at settling cases than I used to be. Right. Although my law partner still says I'm the worst mediation lawyer ever. So we'll see.
Well, when you get a string of big verdicts over decades, it probably gets a little easier to settle them too.
Well, it does. But the mountains you're climbing change, I guess. But verdicts are a means to an end. I plead guilty that when I was in my 30s, a lot of it was ego-driven and business building-driven. Now I look at it much more as a means to an end to try to get maximum dollars for clients. And it's not so much about Mikal Watts as it is about Mikal Watts' clients. You get a few of those, those verdicts reversed on appeal for no good reason, and you start. It's like a cold shower.
Yeah.
You have to be a lot more careful in the state of Texas, which is probably why I try so many cases outside the state of Texas now.
And are there some keys? I mean, you've been one of the few people that have consistently gotten really big verdicts, and not just in one area, but I mean, there's people that are really good trucking lawyers or really good pharmaceutical lawyers, but you've done it in medical devices, pharmaceuticals, trucking, refinery, auto crashworthiness. I mean, it's not like a subject matter expertise. You just had a knack of getting big verdicts. So what are some of the keys?
Yeah, I tell people the joke that you start off, you're doing personal injury work, and then you go into product liability work, and then you go into pharmaceutical work, and then class actions or patents or commercial litigation, and the joke is that every time you go into a new area, the people that are in those areas say, oh my gosh, the lawyers here are the smartest, they're the most expensive, they've got the most money, they're the toughest, the experts, the science, this is just the hardest area of law ever, and what they're really saying is refer your case to me, don't come into my sector.
Right.
And what I realized is that's all nonsense. Regardless of what the subject matter is, a trial is a trial is a trial. All that we are doing is we are the vehicles of communicating our client's story. And that's really all it is it's a story that needs to be communicated. The people that we represent have suffered unspeakable tragedies or lost huge amounts of money because of the conduct of others. And our challenge is to take complex subject matter and distill it down to a simple message. And I think that's what I try to focus on is that the biggest criticism that I hear of lawyers is they try to talk at people. And I think juries can pick up a fraud. The jury system is just so brilliant. You put 24 eyes on any set of facts, and it's the best bullshit meter ever invented. But it's not just with respect to your arguments, it's with respect to your integrity, and juries can sense a lawyer that's putting one over on them. And so you've got to be honest. You've got to talk in a way that's not talking down to jurors, but is communicating with them at their level. And you've got to do it with absolute honesty and show your warts, tell them what your strengths are, and trials more than anything are a contest for credibility between the two lead lawyers. And if you win that contest, you're going to win the case.
The simplicity is, and I remember when I was getting into the product liability world, and you were generous enough to share a lot of things with me, depositions. And I remember the first time I was reading a trial transcript, because I'd gone to these seminars and there's people talking about all this complex stuff, and I'm thinking you have to really master and talk all this complex stuff. And then I read one of your transcripts, and my first like, well, what's the big deal? How's he winning these cases? It sounds so simple. And it took me like years to realize to take the complex, understand it, and then make it simple is the art.
Yeah. I go to Oak Hills Church where Max Lucado is the pastor, and I enjoy watching him preach because everything is a metaphor. Whatever, biblical theme of the day is, he can bring it right down into something very simple. And I don't care how complex the science is, how complex the engineering is. There are ways to bring those concepts down to something simple. My brother and I try a lot of tire cases, and he's got this wonderful full head of hair, and of course I'm bald as can be. And when you talk about a detread of a tire and the physics that are involved in terms of the lack of friction on the roadway and everything like that, I'll literally go up and I'll start putting my hands in my brother's hair, and I said, "This is a full tread," and look at all this friction, and then I'll just slide my hand over my bald head, and there's no friction, there's no, and juries just die laughing, but they get the point, and there's always the ability, whatever the engineering is that's involved, to take a complex notion and make it very simple, and that's what you should do.
Sorry to kind of keep going from wildly divergent topics.
No,
but
you're good.
One thing that really surprised me when I kind of got to know you, I remember I'd always heard like Mikal Watts, big verdict, flying in jets and all this other cool stuff. And first time like, will this guy even talk to me? And the first time I met you at a conference, you're having a beer, and it was like a light. It wasn't even like a fancy beer. And you're like, hey, come on, have a beer with us. And just like talking to like a normal guy. You don't have any errors. You're not stuck up. You share with other lawyers, even though you could very easily have said, I had my first Ford case, and you had tried and got a verdict on there, and you had let me go to you had an office in Brownsville at the time. I lived in Brownsville at the time. You let me go to your office and look at all your exhibits, and you didn't ask me for anything. And, you could have very easily said, well, I'm the Ford lawyer. Why am I going to let somebody else take these cases that I'm already winning and making money on? And you didn't do that. How do you stay so, I guess, generous and down to earth?
Well, you and I have both been part of a group called the Attorneys Information Exchange Group, and there's kind of an ethos that you share everything. And it really offends me as I get into these federal MDLs about everybody tagging everybody for common benefit fees and this and that. It's, the best way to do a good job for our clients is to disseminate information. And I share everything that I've got, but I can assure you that I have been the recipient of sharing in ways that have made me an incredible amount of money. I'll never forget it. In 1998, I think, I went to Hawaii to give a speech, and the Attorneys Information Exchange Group and our friend Don Slavic was out there, and they called a breakout meeting of AIEG, and it was like 5 of us that were there. It was obviously a boondoggle to go out there and go to Hawaii, and so the 5 of us sat in a room, and we just talked about these different cases, and literally, I remember it like it was yesterday. I said, well, I'm getting ready to try a Dodge fire case. This is that $80 million verdict I told you about, and Don says, well, we had one of those 7 years ago, and it was a real old truck at the time, and of course, Chrysler had what they call a document retention policy, which is really a document destruction policy, and all their stuff was gone, and they hadn't produced anything, and he goes, yeah, we had one of those cases 7 or 8 years ago. I'll send you the documents. And he sent me just this treasure trove of about 50 documents that was just the best stuff ever. And, I used those documents to get an $80 million verdict. And that would have never happened but for Don Slavic having that sharing spirit. And so, I do not think that lawyers should use their success in a case to try to force somebody that wants that information to refer the case in order to get it. You open up your files, you share alike, you expect sharing, and when you get it, we're all better off, and more importantly, our clients are better off. And so, any deposition I've ever taken, any document I've ever gotten produced is available to anybody. No questions asked, and that's always been our firm's ethos, and I hope it'll be everybody else's.
We're the same way, and actually what I found is from a marketing perspective, being the person that shares, being the authority that doesn't demand, makes them more likely to come to you when you have the case where it makes sense to do it together.
Yeah, that's right. And the other fun thing about that is that the kinds of cases that we typically have done, they're big, expensive, technical cases, and there's plenty of work for 2 to do. And the one thing I really enjoyed about starting my own firm is I'm not one of these lawyers that accepts referrals and says, get out of my way until I send you a check. I love working on cases with other lawyers and working on them together. And you make good friendships that are lifelong friendships. You get different perspectives. I've learned a long time ago that my way is not the only way, and I really enjoy trying cases with other lawyers. And so you share documents, you share information, and if somebody wants to bring you in, great, but don't cut them out, especially if it's a young lawyer. It's his his first big case. The worst thing you can do is cut him out. That guy will work himself to the bone to make sure that case is a success, and sometimes they just want a little guidance about how to get there.
Yeah. And you don't have to have every case. You don't have time to do every case.
No, that's right. I mean, my wife will tell you that I've got way too many cases at all times. So we should all work hard on the cases we have, enjoy the cases we're going after, and really use our platform as a vehicle to do good. And it's not just about the money. It's all about the things that we're able to do with the litigation we bring. I mean, I could take you down to your car right now and walk around that car and show you 30, 40 different safety features that are there directly as a result of litigation that I've brought together with a whole bunch of our friends in the automotive defect world. These lawsuits make a difference, and they're a force to do good. And so that ought to be the primary focus.
Absolutely. The money takes care of itself, too, if you focus on taking care of people.
It does.
But one thing, as you get better, you start getting in more work. You can't do it all yourself. You got to start having other lawyers work for you.
Right.
And you guys have kept up a pretty high level of practice. How do you get other lawyers to do things the way you want it done and still have a life and still be able to do the work you want to do on cases?
Yeah, it's a tension. I mean, obviously, most of the cases that come into my law firm come in because people want me to work on it or Frank to work on it or, one of our senior guys, but you've got young lawyers that need that experience. And so, typically what I try to do is I try to take law clerks, for example, everywhere I go. And I don't stick people into a room to do legal research for me. I take them with me. I have large groups of people when I do these big trials, not necessarily because I need large groups of people, but it's part of the training process. And particularly since we moved to San Antonio, what I've learned is that it's a tremendous advantage having a law firm in a town with a law school because legal talent is plentiful and it's cheap. And they're just dying for a chance. And I've hired more good lawyers over the last 10 years that started off making nothing as a law clerk. And I'm not one of these law firms that pays a bunch of money for summer clerks. I said, look, I'm not going to pay you. I pay them $10 an hour,
Wow.
which is just outrageous. But I say, I don't need you and don't particularly want you. But if you want the experience, I'll give it to you. And as I joke, I give good clerkship. And we drag people around. We put them in responsible positions, and we give them the experience of a lifetime. And then that cream rises to the top. You can see it. Within 2 weeks of somebody walking in the door. Our latest lawyer is a young lady named Meredith Drucker, who's taking the bar next summer. And it was a friend of a friend from church asking a favor, and she comes in, and inside of about 48 hours,
Yeah.
and you're just like, that's going to be one of my lawyers. And, so that's a real advantage. But to answer your question, the more frequently that person is sitting in a deposition with you, not back at the office doing make work or going through a trial with you, the quicker that person's going to be a lawyer that's useful to you. One of the best experiences of my life was I was a baby lawyer, and I was carrying David Perry's briefcase as he was trying a case. It was a Ford case against Guy Allison and Darrell Barger.
Wow.
And it was just a battle royale, and it was the most fun I've ever had. And I just watched. And it was just a remarkable experience. But you've got to experience things in order to do it well. And the big challenge that we have as a profession is we have an entire generation of lawyers that don't have anything to work on themselves. With the size of cases that we handle, people don't want a first-year lawyer trying that case. It doesn't mean that first-year lawyer can't try it with me and take on, a small witness here or there. It's nothing's going to wreck the case putting on an EMT, in one of these cases, or putting on a nurse to talk about the pain or this kind of thing. But the sooner you get those lawyers in a courtroom, watching you do the heavy lifting, but they're involved enough that it's not just a show. The better those lawyers are going to be, and the more useful they're going to be to you.
Yeah, we've been trying to do the same. We're up somehow 10, and I'm about to make an offer to an 11th one later today.
Excellent. Yeah.
A law clerk, actually.
Yeah.
Following your lead on that too. Frangietta, actually, your partner, told me that you all had been doing that, and so I decided to try it.
Yeah, it's really been great. I mean, St. Mary's, I think, is an excellent law school, and there's a lot of kids over there. And it's a real tragedy. I just read another Grisham book called The Rooster Bar, and it's about a bunch of kids that are just indebted to the student loan system. And a lot of these kids that are going to college and law school, they get out with several $100,000 in debt. It's a soft job market. And so what Frank and I have done is very intentionally, we constantly have clerks at St. Mary's and other law schools, but primarily St. Mary's because they're here, and we just put them to work on stuff, and you can really identify talent quickly, and so it's good for the law firm as well as for the kids.
Or something you'd want to share as far as
here's what I've learned. As you try to build an empire, you've got to maintain quality standards. When I built my own law firm from 1997 to 2001, it was largely corpus, and then we acquired a law firm in Brownsville. But my fingerprints were over everything. And then when we started making a lot of money, being the fool that I was, instead of taking it home, I turned that into 5 offices, one in Houston and Austin and San Antonio, McAllen and Brownsville and Corpus, and I made a lot more money with 5 offices, but I was constantly flying around, overseeing different offices, experiencing disappointment when things weren't done the way I would want to do them. And so, as you grow, you've got to maintain that quality of process. And I've found in retrospect that that's easier to do with a lot of people in one facility as opposed to different facilities across the state. And so, we've got a process. It's not the only process, but I think that one big problem that lawyers have is we think in terms of the amount of money that we recover for our clients. I think in terms of how long it takes to get them that amount of money and what's the net to the client. In other words, if we spend 3, 4, 5 years and spend a huge amount of money ginning the file or hiring too many experts or this or that, and then the client nets out a small amount after 5 years, that's not really a win for the client. And so when I say that I'm much better at settling cases now, you've got to get the reputation that you'll try the case. And defense lawyers know if you will, and they know if you won't. And if you will, they'll know that if they don't settle the case, you'll go try it. And one of the things that I've always tried to do is we're not afraid to go take a loss. People don't remember your losses, but I got plenty of them. These fools that run around saying they've never lost a case, it's just idiocy. They're not trying enough of them.
I've lost more cases than most people have tried.
Yeah, I mean, you got to go down there and you got to try them, and you can't always pick all of your cases, particularly if you've got 5 offices and people, are bringing in cases that you wish they hadn't.
Usually it's me bringing in the case I wish I hadn't.
Well, yeah, but now we're a lot better at intake and deciding what we want to bring, and the challenge is that we get to be picky, but those cases are going to go somewhere, and you can't do a good job working on all the cases, and so you don't want to be a hog getting slaughtered because you're trying to grab everything. You've got to be selective and do a really good job on what you choose to take in. So I'm a much more project-based lawyer than I used to be. I used to just be, bring in all the cases and, churn them and burn them, if you will. But now, as I've gotten older, I tend to do a lot more of these big, massive projects, while Frank administers the other half of the firm doing the individual cases. And then, fortunately, I'm still greedy enough that when they get close to trial, I'll dive in and try to come try the case with them, even though I haven't done a thing on the case.
I found when I dive into a case someone else worked up, and I haven't been in the day-to-day intricacies of the case and got in all these little fights that don't really matter to a jury.
Right.
I think it's an advantage because
Yeah.
you really see it through a fresh set of eyes, just like a jury's going to see it through a fresh set of eyes.
I agree. My old friend, God rest his soul, John O'Quinn, used to pick up a file 48 hours before. I mean, literally the Friday before, and he just had this mind that he can consume things. It takes me a little longer than 48 hours, but typically I parachute into cases being handled by my other lawyers about 2 weeks out. And if I know something's coming and it's going to be a hot case, I'll take a key corporate rep or I'll go take a key expert. But most of the cases that I try that aren't my own, I've done very little. But when you come in, you really see the forest from the trees. And somebody that's worked on a file and taken 50 depositions, a lot of times you just lose what it is, what's the story of the case? What is it that makes it a good case? What's simple about it? Whereas if you come in at the end and you read everything, you can really separate the wheat from the chaff and try it in a simplistic way that makes a lot of sense.
As long as you have good people that can work it up right up.
Yeah, fortunately, probably the most fun I've ever had as a lawyer, not as a husband, but is when we did have 30 lawyers and 5 offices, and I was set for trial 3 times a week, every week. You try a bunch of cases, you can figure out who your good lawyers are in a hurry, and you get rid of your bad ones. But one of the challenges of being a trial lawyer is it's not a free lunch. There are people at home that are not seeing you. And a wife that isn't seeing you, kids that are growing up without you. I got in a fight with Ford in 2005, and I felt like they weren't paying enough money anymore after these wild successes we'd had in the Ford Firestone days, and I was egotistical and braggadocious and thought I was the guy, and literally screamed at a Ford lawyer and said I wasn't going to talk to him anymore. And he said, "Well, I'm your settlement lawyer." And I said, "No, you're not. You're not settling anything with me for the rest of the year." And I stormed out. And when you make a threat like that, you better be ready to follow up because we got to try 6 Ford cases in 8 months, and those are 5 and 6 week long trials. And at the end of those 8 months, I had $8.5 million in my client ledger with Ford cases alone, and no money coming in. And I had $110 million in verdicts, but that's no way to live a life. And so, I come home thinking that, I'm some Roman warrior coming back through the city gates, entitled to adulation and fanfare. And my wife says, "You idiot, you haven't seen your kids all year. You were in trial 43 weeks this year."
Yeah, it is the other perspective. I was all excited. This week, I had a Minnesota lawyer refer me a case that happened in Wisconsin. So, someone trying to go to the practice, like, "Come on, honey, I got a case in Wisconsin. The lawyer in Minnesota heard of me, and he sent it over." And she's like, "So how much you going to be on the road? You're going to be in Wisconsin? How long is that going to take?" It's like, okay.
Yeah. You mentioned me flying around in jets. The truth of the matter is if you're going to practice out of state, it's like a car. I'm in the air 3.5 days a week. My wife and I have a deal that I'm not gone more than 2 nights a week, unless I'm in trial. And you can't do that without that airplane. But
You can't.
But it comes with a cost, and to this day, I refuse to have internet access on my airplane because I don't need to be up there surfing the internet. I need to be working. And you can get a lot of work done while you're flying around, but those are hours you're away from your wife and your family.
Yeah, it's a sacrifice.
It is. And as it happens, we do some work for Valero, which is a San Antonio-based company, and it's the only company that I really do consistent work for. I don't represent them against injured people, but company-on-company stuff, this kind of thing. So I've tried, handle some cases for them, and they wanted me to handle a dispute that they had out in Northern California against PG&E, which is the utility out there, shut off their power, and their refinery went down, and it mucked up all the pipes and cost them a whole lot of money. And we were up there focus grouping a case, and those wildfires had just happened. It was in October, and I started reading about it, and I just got transfixed. And so literally the last several months, I've been in Northern California. We have an office in Santa Rosa, California, and we're representing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that have been burned out of their house and home by this fire that we say that PG&E started. So that's my project of the day right now is Northern California wildfires.
Okay.
Which is a real tragedy.
It is, and let's say someone knows someone that lost their home or business in the Northern California wildfire. How would they get a hold of you or your firm to get you involved?
Well, we're on the internet, wattsguerra.com. We have an office in Santa Rosa at 70 Stony Point Road, or you can call 444-44. No, I'm just kidding. It's something out in Santa Rosa. We're out there pretty persistently. We've got a lot of people out there working on it because it's a real tragedy. I mean, when I went up there, I thought it was going to be a lot like what happened in South Texas after Hurricane Harvey. You got 80, 100,000 people that have lost their houses. They have all got this blank look on their face. But I quickly realized it wasn't even close to the same because the people in Texas had 5 days to get out. They watched water rise slowly. These people had 5 minutes to get out, running away from a 50-foot wall of fire. And so there's just a lot of post-traumatic stress up there. The neighborhoods look like, something Dresden in 1943. I mean, it's unbelievable, the death and destruction.
So how do you make that jump from, there's the first jump from just being able to handle a big case with what we call a single event case,
right?
But then making that big jump to handling a mass tragedy where you got to figure out, is this a good thing to get into or not? Because it's going to take a lot of your time and treasure. You've got to figure out, how am I going to manage all these people? I mean, how did you make that transition? Well,
it was trial and error. I was doing individual personal injury, primarily product liability cases, one by one. And there was a sequence of events that happened that kind of led me into the mass torts that I'm, kind of specialized in right now. Number one, as we were doing these individual torts, my first boss, David Perry, said he wanted to take a 6-month sabbatical, and would I take over 3 of his cases because he wasn't going to be able to do it. And he wanted to travel the world with his wife, and I said yes, just out of blind allegiance. One of them was a seatbelt buckle case, and 2 of them were tire cases against a company called Firestone. And they didn't look like very good cases to me, but I did it because Perry asked me to. And as it happened, the Attorneys Information Exchange Group was meeting in San Antonio, and so I called a subgroup meeting and just asked them, can we have one of these things like what we did with Don Slavic, where 5 or 6 of us compare notes about these cases? And so the people at AIG called a subgroup meeting for Firestone Tires. And literally, I thought there would be 5 or 6 people there. And I was told that there was going to be more people than expected, but I didn't know what that meant. And I walked in, and it was the largest conference room at the Hyatt downtown on the Riverwalk here in San Antonio, and it had 300 people in it. Oh, wow. And I realized that we had stumbled across, in effect, a mass tort in the vehicular context. So we organized all of that. We had done that in the Chrysler minivan litigation in the 1990s, and I started to realize that, these product failures tend to happen to many people at once, and so you need to organize it and be able to handle that. And then over the next 3 or 4 years, I was trying a lot of the first cases in the country involving medical products and drugs. And part of the reason for that is that the county courts and the district courts in Nueces County and Corpus Christi, where I was from, they have concurrent jurisdiction. And so we were able to get those cases to trial in lightning speed, and it drove the MDL guys crazy because they like to, bill common benefit time over the course of several years, and and I would just set it for trial and go, and they'd just go nuts. But then we kept hitting these huge verdicts, and they didn't understand, who is this young guy in Corpus Christi? So I quickly learned that the pharmaceutical industry in this country, as of about 1994, had the ability to fast track a lot of drugs and get them out, and that's got a positive societal benefit, but it also leads to mistakes, and so there were a lot of recalls. So I got into pharmaceuticals, and I quickly realized that while I knew how to try a pharmaceutical case, I didn't know how to handle hundreds or thousands of them at once. My older brother was vice president of a software company, and I asked him to come join me, and he built all of our databases from scratch, all of our systems from scratch, and filed, I think it was 3,000 FinFin cases in 4 months. Wow. And so we kind of taught ourselves how to do it, and spent millions of dollars on a proprietary software that can handle hundreds of thousands of people at once. So we built the systems capability, and then it's just a manpower deal and organization. But the cases aren't any different. There's, we may think of them as a bellwether case that, is one of the test cases, if you will, for thousands of cases behind it. That one jury is still one jury deciding one dispute, and they've got to be tried with, complex stuff being simplified and stories being told by good lawyers. So that part's not any different. They're big cases. They have much bigger financial consequences because you've got millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars and thousands of cases behind them, but you still got to go and win that one case.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that, the part of it, the trying it really would attract me, the having to manage 10 or 20,000 clients at once and communicate with them and try to keep them happy and trying to not go bankrupt while you're funding this thing is something.
Yeah.
I'm not in that world yet. But
well,
God bless you for doing it, and I'm glad you're doing it. But
it's
you had to delay a lot of gratification. I mean, you could have just kind of cashed in and stopped working, and you decided to do that stuff. And what drives you? It can't just be the money, because at some point, when you can live in whatever house you want to live in is paid off, you can go wherever you want to go, eat wherever you want to eat. It doesn't make much of a difference in your daily life to have more money. What is it that kind of drives you to keep doing?
I think that the good Lord has put certain instincts in human beings, and I think there's 3 of them that come to mind. One of them is faith and passing it along to our kids. One of them is sex, that need to procreate to keep the species going, and one of them is hunt. Somebody's got to go hunt for the food, and I think it's in our bones, in our being, and what we do is hunt, and trying these cases is part of that instinctive hunting nature that we have, and I enjoy the hunt, and I enjoy the kill, and I really think that's what drives me is these cases are big projects against massive entities with all the resources in the world, and there's just something beautiful about a trial lawyer being able to take the poorest of the poor and put them on an equal footing with the richest of the rich, and to see the terror in the eyes of these people that are so arrogant and think they're entitled to do whatever they do, regardless of who it hurts, and stopping that. But then the other thing that I really believe in is properly managed litigation can do great things. One of those 3 clients that David Perry gave me was a lady named Vicki Hendricks, whose boy was killed when his Firestone tire detreaded and his Ford Explorer rolled over. And she was violently angry about it. And of course, I would be too if my son was killed. And she swore to me that she would never settle her case unless they recalled the tire. And I remember rolling my eyes at the time, says nobody ever recalled a product because of a single lawsuit. But when 300 of us got together, it led to a lot of pressure, a worldwide, recall of those tires, 17 million tires recalled. So there's a lot of good that can happen when lawyers get organized. It's kind of that deal about why did you go to law school? It wasn't just because of the money. Right now, one of our new projects is we're getting involved in the opioid litigation. And it's so intoxicating to see 300 or 400 lawyers from across the United States get organized. And it's kind of our generation cigarette litigation. It's a public health epidemic. And it's killing more people than anything right now. And
We've
so,
lost 2 clients this year to opioid overdose.
Oh, it's just outrageous. And it's got an $85 billion a year societal cost. And so we're organizing with a whole bunch of other lawyers. An MDL just got appointed. It's in the Northern District of Ohio in the Cleveland area. A plaintiff steering committee is being put together. And, my guess would be we'll probably be on it. But then you're going to invest tens of millions of dollars over the next, this will probably take 5-6 years. But if we can take down the opioids fraud, which has got tens of thousands of Americans hooked every year, I think that's doing good. And the fact that you're doing well while doing good, I guess is fine. But all you have to do is look at the smoking rates in this country versus where they were 20 years ago before some very gutsy lawyers took on an industry that had never paid a dime in litigation and took them down. Yep. They saved a bunch of lives. They made a bunch of money while doing it, but they saved a bunch of lives and changed society forever, which is good. And so hopefully we'll do that for opioids as well.
Just kind of to wrap it up, what are some of for trial lawyers, the future opportunities you see for us, and then future threats?
Well, the threats are everywhere. Access to the courts took a big hit on November the 8th of last year. There are bills going through the United States Congress that are drafted by the American Tort Reform Association that are getting through committees without even a committee hearing. No testimony being taken, no debate. It's just passed on a party line vote. There's no debate on the floor of the House. There are bills that have passed the House of Representatives that nobody's even heard about that would just wipe out tort liability in this country. And so, there's enormous threats to trial lawyers legislatively. Obviously, here in Texas, we have a similar threat in that we have a Texas Supreme Court that is bought and paid for. Those people are put on there for a specific reason, and they execute on that reason. They take out verdicts for no reason. They rewrite the law. It's the most activist court I've ever seen, and I used to serve as a briefing attorney on it back when it was a 5-4 court. Massive frauds excused, huge product failures excused, all sorts of gift wrap, candy wrapped sweeteners for corporate America, just over and over and over again. It is a disgrace. And so the Texas Supreme Court is not a court so much as it is a line of last defense for corporate America. How those guys can wake up every morning and continually put themselves in an ivory tower and ignore a Seventh Amendment result of what 12 people who take their time and do their constitutional duties to serve as a jury and come up with a result, and these guys just wipe it out like it never happened. That's an assault. And so, and then legislatively here in Texas, you have systemically billionaires in this state that fund TLR, Texans for Lawsuit Reform. It has nothing to do with reform. We've had 25 years of reform. Every year they come up with a new and innovative way to limit their liability for their tortious conduct. And that's going to be a problem. But what I've learned is the biggest threat to trial lawyers is themselves. And what I mean by that is that we allow ourselves to fall into a psychosis about how tough it is and how much easier it was 25 years ago. And when I started, everybody was complaining about how hard it was then and how much easier it was back in the 1980s. And what I've learned is that as it gets more difficult, we need to rise to the challenge. And as long as we rise to the challenge, our clients are going to do very well. But there's so many people that refuse to go to trial now because they're convinced that the jury pool's been tainted, that there's no way you're going to get a fair trial. And what I've experienced over and over and over again is that I don't care how conservative the juries are, whether they vote Republican or Democratic, every one of them shows up for court. They're pissed off about having to be there on the first day. They give you the groans and the moans when they're selected to that jury, and they're just, they can't believe how unlucky they were. But almost uniformly, once they're sworn in and they start it, they rise to the challenge. And ordinary people off the streets that don't know each other form this beautiful thing known as a jury, where they are a cohesive judge of a set of facts. And almost, at least in my cases, almost unanimously, when you're done, whether you've won or lost, they all appreciated having been involved in the process. And I've learned that most judges are trying to do the right thing regardless of their political ideology, Republican, Democrat alike. And juries are certainly a group of people that can be counted upon to weigh facts and do well. And so, it's a system that's fraught full of risk because of the appellate risk, but at the same time, the idea that you can't go in front of a jury in 2017 and get a fair and just verdict is that's just not true. It's still true today as much as it was in 1989 when I first became a lawyer.
I agree. I think just learning to trust the people on the jury is so important. My last trial, it was a broken leg, and honestly, a week before trial, I was not real happy about trying the case. Someone else had worked it up. I didn't think it was a very good case. And my jury, the foreman was an active duty Marine. We had an engineer, we had a doctor's office manager, we had a sheriff's deputy. If you looked at the demographics, you would have said, Cowan, why did you take this jury? And I didn't strike those people because I talked to them and listened to them and just could tell that they had an open mind. And we got a great verdict. We got $1.25 million on $44,000 in medical bills.
I remember it.
But because we trusted the jury and we had a good story, and yes, a lot of those people vote Republican. A lot of those people are very conservative. But the truth is the truth, and justice is justice. And I found that, is it harder now than it was 25 years ago? Probably. But for those of us that make it, there's a lot less competition too. There's a lot less people trying to do this, and there's opportunities for those that are willing to take chances and work hard and do it right.
Yeah, I stopped counting the number of cases I tried a decade ago, but it's got to be in the hundreds. And I don't know how many I've won and how many I've lost. I don't keep track of it. But what I do keep track of is the number of times after you've won or you've lost, and you go home and you evaluate. Most of the times when you lose, within about a week, it's pretty clear why you lost, and I should have thought of that at the start, this kind of thing. But out of several hundred jury verdicts, I can only think of 3 where it just sticks in my craw, and I think the jury did the wrong thing. And those are pretty good odds, If you go down there and you let the jury decide, more often than not, they're going to do the right thing.
We might not like it, but it's going to be the right thing.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Of course.
And, look forward to continuing our friendship.
Absolutely, buddy.
I hope you enjoyed our interview with Mikal Watts. He was incredibly forthcoming. It's not all the kind of chest pounding and I'm so great that you sometimes get from people who are successful. I think he was incredibly down to earth and honest about the pros and cons of the life and the costs of success, as well as what he's done to make it. I hope it was useful to you. We're going to have another great guest, a man named Tim Mackey from Vista Consulting. Now, you may or may not have heard of Tim or Vista Consulting, but Vista Consulting is actually a company that my law firm uses, and it's done incredible work for us. Vista Consulting helps plaintiffs' lawyers manage their practices so that you can get things done and still have a life. Because, I want to be a big trial lawyer. I want to get all the big cases, but I also want to see my kids on the weekend, and I also want to have money in the bank. Tim's helped me do that, and I think he's got some things that could help you too.
We look forward to talking with you again soon as we continue to explore powerful insights from our amazing hosts and remarkable guests here on Trial Lawyer Nation. Until then, please be sure to subscribe and review this podcast on iTunes or your favorite listening app so we can continue to reach more listeners. Visit us at www.triallawyernation.com to send us a message, listen to previous podcasts, or learn more about Michael Cowan and our guests. This podcast has been hosted by Michael Cowan and is not intended to, nor does it create the attorney-client privilege between our hosts, guests, or contributors and any listener for any reason. Content from the podcast is not to be interpreted as legal advice. All thoughts and opinions expressed herein are only those from which they came.